Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can jump into this. Arlen, thank you so much for the work and organizing all of this, making this happen for us today. And let's ensure that you guys can see my full screen, and hopefully we are good to go on that.
Yeah, looks great, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Okay, so what's at stake? School culture. We're going to spend some time going over how to engage with our stakeholders to impact the culture of your school. I saw a lot of principals and assistant principals popping into the chat. Before we get going and I introduce myself, listen, it's Thursday afternoon, and I want to know how full your tank is. So I know here in North Carolina, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but here in North Carolina, it has been a rainy, cold day for North Carolinians. And so the tank for some of the principals that I've been visiting today maybe is not sitting on that F. So throw in the chat, where are you at right now? So are you a quarter tank, a half tank? Are you full? Or maybe empty. Hopefully, you're not completely empty because we're going to be spending some time together. So throw in that chat where you're at today as you come into this space and as we spend time together. Um, okay, great. I see Keith's a half a tank. We got a three-quarter tank. I like to see that. Good, good. Everybody's kind of looking forward to that Thanksgiving break coming up, I'm sure. Um, it's possible most of you might have had Veterans Day off, so we're kind of operating on a short week, possibly. That might have helped that gas tank a little bit. Uh, so great. It's nearly bedtime for Michelle. I see you, Michelle. Yeah, two-thirds though. You're still good. Well, I appreciate your participation. We'll have some other moments throughout our time together today where I'll give you some time to reflect on some questions and ask for some feedback in the chat so that we can all kind of gauge and learn from one another. Do want this to be interactive as much as possible and want us to spend our time together so that you're walking away with some outcomes and goals that have been reached. A little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I'm a North Carolina public school educator, been doing that for 25 years. Spent 13 years in the classroom and coaching, primarily basketball, although I did coach a little bit of tennis and a little bit of baseball and a little bit of football in my early years, but primarily a basketball coach, and then transitioned into administration where I spent exactly 14 months as an assistant principal and had an opportunity to go into a principalship where it was a roller coaster and I learned a ton. Did not have a lot of prep time as an assistant principal. It was flying the plane as we built it, so to speak. But I currently have transitioned this past summer to a much more urban school district where I'm supervising 20 schools K through 12, and I'm in a leadership supervisory role with principals. So I go into schools. I mentioned earlier that I visited three schools today, I go in and I work as a support thought partner to principals and to leadership teams. So, for example, I sat in a third grade PLT meeting today at 1 o'clock and was able to provide some probing questions afterwards with the leadership team about some things that they're doing spectacular, but also some things maybe that can enhance their systems and processes. So that's what I'm doing now after spending 12 years in principalships. As I mentioned, I am currently in a much more urban district, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Some of you might have heard of Wake Forest University. That is where Winston-Salem is the home of Wake Forest University. But the majority of my time I spent in a rural district where a district as I led a high school for 8 years where I grew up in that community. So it was the community that I went to school at. It was the community that I went to church in and got to know and really in kind of ingrained in that community. And I spent my time there from 2014 to 2021. So about 8 years as a principal there. And recently, this is the local lawn and garden store. And recently, this past summer, I took my 85-year-old dad, and we went to pick up some fertilizer and some grass seed. And I was going to do some yard work and help my dad in his yard a little bit. So we're riding to the LTD Farm and Garden, a little country store. We walk in and we're shopping around, getting what we need. And these two guys, probably in their mid-20s, hey, Mr. Spainhour, what's going on? And all of us in education, we know that moment where you really don't remember their name, but you fake it really well, right? And so I faked it really well, asked them what they're doing with their lives now. They were clearly high school graduates, but I'm the one that handed them a diploma, and I didn't think anything of it. As educators and particularly as administrators, we live in that fishbowl sometimes where people are recognizing us in our communities, and so I just got back in the truck, and my dad and I rolled back towards the house, and he said, "Did you know them?" And I said, "Well, I know that they went to the school where I was the principal. I know that they went to my school, Dad." And he said, "Well, they definitely knew you." And I said, "Yeah, they did." I said, "And I probably, I remembered their names once I asked, but, and he said something to me that sticks to this day, because that was a new experience for him, to see me out kind of in public getting recognized as their former principal. And I said, "Well, Dad, pretty much anybody that's in their 20s currently in this community came through our school where I was the principal, and so I'm their principal. Anybody that's in their 20s in this community, I was their principal." And he says to me this. He says, "That's a big responsibility, Kevin." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I guess it is." And he said, "To be someone for somebody is a big responsibility." And so I encourage all of you in the work that you're doing right now as we get into this PD session. I don't want it to be lost on you that you are someone for somebody. And that's a big responsibility. When my 85-year-old dad said that to me this summer, it kind of hit me different. Like for him to recognize that I'm someone for somebody when you're working in the business of education. So be encouraged. People look to you, and you realize that. So just be encouraged that you are someone to somebody. And as we think about and get into this work, as we talk about our stakeholders, I want to go over our agenda today, and let's be able to really dive into what it means to have the right kind of school culture, and then how are we identifying our key stakeholders. We're going to spend some time with strategies. How do we assess our school culture? So ways that you and your leadership team in the building can assess where you're at as a culture. And for some of you, you might be coming into your school year one. Maybe you're in your second year and you're kind of just now getting a handle of where you're at. For some of you, you might have been in your building for a while and you've been establishing that culture along the way. But I would encourage you, as we know, you're trying to evolve as a school and build that culture, because if you don't maintain it, it can slip. And so we'll end the session today with really some strategies and some keys to building that positive school culture after we've engaged our stakeholders. Okay, so here's our agenda for today, and we'll get moving. Our objectives, as I mentioned, it's the what. What is school culture? So that'll be the first thing that we really get behind and cover today. And then it's the who. Who are the stakeholders that pour into that impact our school culture? Who are the stakeholders that we need to get buy-in from, that we need to get feedback from? And so we'll look at the who, and then finally we'll look at the how, right? So what does it mean to have the right school culture? who is it that establishes that and impacts that, and how do we get buy-in from them, and then how do we implement strategies to make that positive change for our buildings. Okay? Great. So here's what I believe are 6 keys to a school culture. First, shared beliefs and values, communication patterns, relationships and social interactions, academic expectations. And we're going to dive into each of these individually. I just wanted to give you the 6 things that I identify are keys to a positive school culture. Inclusive practices, making sure that we're there for all students and that we're including all students in the impact and culture of the school, and then engaging students and including their voice in school. And so we're going to kind of dive into each of these separately as we unlock our school culture. So shared beliefs and values. Why that matters? It matters because it should shape your decision making. And so what do you assess? You assess your school's mission and vision. And I'm sure you guys have done plenty of work through the years on the importance of the mission and vision of a school, right? And how that ties into really setting the direction for your staff, how it sets the tone for your students, and the pride and traditions that come with the shared beliefs of your schools, and so again, it shapes the behaviors, it shapes the priorities within your school. Those beliefs and those values, how you determine that mission and vision. And I would encourage you, I took over a school 4 years ago, a much larger school than the community school that I was referring to, and you'll hear me talk about West Forsyth in a few slides down the road. But when I arrived at that school, their mission and vision had not been revisited for 12 years. And so I took over there in 21, coming out of the pandemic, and after 1 year of kind of learning the school culture as it sat, and kind of figuring out the people and processes, that second year we looked at revisiting a 12-year mission and vision statement and included our school improvement team. So it could be that you're sitting in a school that's a similar scenario. And so as we know, the changes and the evolution that education has had over the last couple years, if you're sitting on a mission statement and a vision statement that hasn't been revisited post-pandemic, I would definitely encourage you and your leadership team to dive in and do that work so that you can get the beliefs and values that will align with the culture that you're wanting to create in your school. After the shared beliefs and values, and you've laid that foundational groundwork of what you want your school to be, I think another thing to assess is the communication patterns, how information in your school community is being shared, and start with your building, your staff. Do you have a weekly newsletter? How often are they hearing from you as the principal or as the administrator? How often are they getting newsletters within a staff? And I'll be honest, with some, depending on the size of your staff or the culture of your staff, I've had to do this as an administrator. I've had to ask our staff, before you send a all staff email, run it by an administrator. Send it to the administrator, and the administrator will approve it and send it out. That might sound crazy, but like I said, the last school I was at had 140 teachers, and when you send out all staff-wide emails, and then they start hitting reply all, oh my goodness, right? And so having some processes in place within your school campus on how communication patterns are going to be, right? Email can get tricky with tone, with who's replying with who, and particularly between staff members. That can can gaslight some people in some way. So assess that. How's that going with your school? And then look at how you're communicating with your other stakeholders, your family members, your students. Are your teachers using Class Dojo? Are they using Remind? How's those communications happening in your building and with your staff members, with outside agencies and parents and families? Again, communication, especially two-way communication, builds a trust within your stakeholders that is irreplaceable. All right. After communication, we look at relationships. I do think that the communication piece builds on the relationship piece. And it's hard to establish the relationships within a school if your communication patterns are broken. Okay? So I've kind of put these in a little bit of an order as I rank them. Get those beliefs and values, get those first. That becomes the foundation. Establish your communication, assess it, and look at how you're doing things within your community. And then make sure you're spending time with people. Don't forget, we are in the people business. Be someone to somebody, right? You're someone to somebody. And so the quality of those relationships, the teacher-student relationships, the admin to student, admin to teacher relationships are vital. I encourage you, if you are in leadership, which I see a lot of you are, have that morning walk around, where you're greeting people and you're greeting your staff, you're visiting them before the kids arrive, before their classes are full, and you're just, in a very informal way, you're checking in on them. How's your weekend? How's your parent? We're in a season of life with some of our educators where they're dealing with maybe an aging father or aging mother, and so just checking on them personally and letting them see you as a caring member of the collective, right? And letting them know something about your people, about your family, about your struggles, about your weekend or whatever. But building those kind of authentic, genuine relationships is critical, and making sure you're carving out time in your day to do that. Again, for me, it worked in the mornings, but depending on where you're at, what your schedule's like, depending on what your school schedule is like, it may be that you have time in other areas of the day. For me, I was at a high school where we went last in the day, where the high school did not start until 8:45. The kids didn't start, and teachers had to report at 8 o'clock. So I had a 30-minute window between 8 and 8:30 where I would get to go spend some time walking and talking with our staff members. Academic expectations. When you unlock your school culture, you really have to assess where we're at academically. Do we believe as a full staff in holding expectations and high expectations for all students? I've heard recently some podcasts where, and I won't say the name, but I heard a podcast recently where they were referring to an elementary teacher, an elementary mindset of where they bless their hearts all the time. And that's a little bit of a Southern expression. I understand North Carolina to Illinois. I get the Southern, I get that. I don't know if you can hear that accent in my voice or not, but the blessing of your heart, right? And it might look different, sound different, teacher to teacher, school to school, but the concept of, well, bless their heart, little Johnny, he's doing the best he can. That can become a leveling of expectations. That can become a way for staff members and teachers to not hold all kids to this high expectation. And so think about your school. Think about what you're seeing in the classroom as you do classroom walks and instructional walks. As you're meeting in PLTs, as your leadership team is engaging with your staff instructionally. Think about where your academic expectations are. Your academic culture influences student motivation, it influences engagement, and the overall performance and culture of your school. Are your teachers prepped for a full lesson, or are they ending 10 to 15 minutes short? And their lesson didn't take them all the way to the end of the class. And now students have 10 to 15 minutes of really non-instructional dead time where they're disengaged. Is that part of your school culture? If so, that's something you need to address. Inclusive practices. I've included this because it is something that my current school district is got a area of focus in, and it's something that I really believe in. But having that expectation that we're going to include all students in the process of our school culture, and all the student groups are supported and seen around your campus, right? And that culture of inclusivity, it will resonate, and it's just like a pebble being thrown in a river or a pond or a lake. The ripple effect will impact all of your grade levels. It impacts all of your staff when they're seeing all of your ability levels being celebrated and highlighted and included. Those are great ways to just see where you're at as a school. And then engagement and voice, right? And I'm really talking about the student engagement, what opportunities you have for students in your school. And again, we're talking about assessing and unlocking your school culture. Why it matters? Because without student engagement, without including student voice, you don't really get their investment. And I am admittedly a high school person, spent 25 years at the secondary level, 3 years in a middle school and 22 in a high school. But recently I've been seeing the elementary world. And if you're in an elementary school, I guarantee you those kids will say anything and everything to you. I've been learning that. And so getting some of those elementary voices, whether it's a student advisory council, whether it's student leadership groups, focus groups where you're including their voices. I used to love just going and sitting down in the cafeteria and talking to students, just organically having conversations, and then bring up some questions, right? How do you feel about this? What if we were to extend, our homeroom by 5 minutes? Or just talking about some of the things that maybe decisions that already have been made or that will be made. And so I want to give you a time. I've just shared the 6 keys to a school culture. I want you to just take a minute reflection and based on your experience, add in the chat one of those areas that you think is currently a strength for you or a strength for your school, right? Based on the experience, which has been the easiest one for you to kind of sink your teeth into and unlock the keys of the school culture. So you can add those into the chat. And while you're doing that, go ahead and throw in what's your greatest challenge. So out of those 6 keys, what's one that's the hardest one to unlock? All right? Who's going to kick us off here? Who's kicking us off? Which is the areas that is the easiest one to really dive into? All right, great. Strength, relationships, and social. Excellent. Kurt, communication patterns. Great. I like that. Inclusive practices, Alana. Great. Darren, beliefs and values. The challenge of engagement and voice. I understand that. Again, I see student voice as a challenge. Yeah, and Aaron put a strength is currently is inclusive practice and academic expectations. I love the word currently there because, one of the things I have found through my leadership is that it evolves. And depending year to year, and sometimes even within a year, it can be easier to identify areas like inclusive practices or student engagement that are challenges that you can turn into easier ways to unlock and assess your culture. Great. Thank you, Andrea. Equal time for social and relationship building. Absolutely. How are we fitting in some SEL? How are we fitting in? Because SEL is not just about students, right, guys? It's adults in our buildings need some SEL too. Absolutely. Yeah, I hear you on that one, Alana. How much can we continue to add to our people's plate? I hear that quite a lot down here in North Carolina. Absolutely, it's happening everywhere. I feel like we as a educational system don't know how to take stuff off plates. We just add to. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to move from. Thank you all for sharing. That was great participation in the chat. Thank you so much. We're gonna move from the keys of school culture. We're gonna move into identifying our stakeholders. Okay, so here's the 6 that I put in there. Now you might have some other stakeholders that can fit in these other buckets, but here's the 6 that I included. And it wasn't until recently that I would have included 5 and 6. But originally, we always think about obviously our student, staff, families. Then we have some community partners. And then 5 and 6 for me, I added later in my career, to be honest, as I realized the importance of school board and the decision makers that impact schools in your district. I realized that I needed to engage with them. I needed to invite them to some of the events at my high school. I needed to include them in some things and to engage them and communicate with them as opposed to seeing them as a separate entity altogether. They are a stakeholder that impact the work being done in your school. And then the other one was alumni. And again, depending on the size of the school district you're working in, it may be that your alumni, and obviously I know a lot of us think about high school alumni, and you think about what class you graduated in. I'm not going to have you put that in the chat. But even at the elementary level, you have alumni. And one of the things that, over the last probably 10 years has become very popular is inviting those high school graduates back to their elementary schools to do graduation walks. That is a way to have your alumni come back and be celebrated, but also a way for your teachers to reconnect with some of those alumni. So it doesn't matter what level, elementary, middle, or high, you have alumni. How can you engage with them, right? So I want to tell you a story. The most recent high school I was at was West Forsyth High School. And before he was CP3, who is Chris Paul, the NBA superstar, and he was an Olympian gold medal winner, NBA Hall of Famer. Before he was that, he was this little kid at West Forsyth High School circa 2003, 2004. Okay, I was not at the school at the time, but he went on to local Wake Forest there in Winston-Salem. He spent a couple years at Wake Forest University honing his skills as a point guard, and then after 2 years at college, went to the NBA and just became an all-star, right? For West Forsyth, which I took over as principal in 2021, March of 21, I learned quickly. I grew up in the area, so I knew obviously of Chris Paul. I knew of his connection with West Forsyth, that he was an alumni. What I didn't realize is that the ties from him and the school had been severed. And without getting into back history, although I learned that, there was a point in time where he was very connected. He and his family, who still live in the area, his parents still live in the area, were very connected to the school even after he had graduated. But that connection had been broken. And so, of course, as I came in as a new principal, and my background in basketball, of course, I was excited. Hey, I'm at Chris Paul's school, and so I wanted to try to do some things to so we could get him and his family reconnected. West Forsyth High School, large campus, right? And in an urban area, 2,400 students, 145 staff members, and it's in the village of Clemens, North Carolina, just a suburb of Winston-Salem. You can see there all the different buildings, the aerial view. It's just a very large campus, 14 different buildings that have classrooms in it. And so as I took on this new role, I wanted to figure out a way that we could build some unity within our school, and then connect our school unity, which was pretty strong, but we could connect our school unity to the greater community. And I started with Chris Paul. The first thing I did was tried to figure out, talk to some old teachers that had been at West Forsyth for a long time, and they had some Facebook connections with the Paul parents, and I asked them to reach out, and ended up getting a breakfast with the parents of Chris. And so I took them out to breakfast and sat down and talked with them, engaged with them, and talked about a possible idea that I had. And that idea was remodeling a gymnasium. And I wanted to remodel that gymnasium, and then I wanted to name the floor after their son. And so part of that initial meeting was just an introduction, but also then a proposal. And now understand, Chris Paul at this point, this was just 4 years ago. He is a multimillionaire. I never asked for one penny. So it wasn't me going to them and trying to come with my hand out and saying, we want to do this, can you give us this? That wasn't it. It was about really trying to connect their family, who was a very well-known entity, with the community, with the stakeholders and community partners that we have, their foundation that they have, and connect all those folks back into the school. And so we started a gym remodel. After that, we got very strategic with how we were going to engage everybody. We created this great invitation. We sent out invitations to alumni. So we were able to secure his teammates that he played with in high school. We sent out all kinds of personal invitations to alumni, school board members, town officials, the mayor, obviously the superintendent, certain families. We were able to get in contact with his former head coach in high school, invited him back. And I'm telling you, it wasn't easy, right? It took time, and it took several members of our leadership team, myself, the athletic director, my assistant principals, to get this work done. But we sent out those personal invitations. We sent out invitations to our local news medias, our newspapers and whatnot. And then we planned it for September the 1st, which was literally the first week of school. Kids came back on a Monday, and we had this celebration on a Thursday. That was intentional as we kicked off the 22-23 school year. We created that space so that magic can happen, and it did. We had a fantastic day. Fantastic day. All these stakeholders came back. Chris and his family came back. We named the court after him. We were able to engage every stakeholder, and I can't tell you how much of an impact, as I continued the next two years in my role at that school, how much that impacted the community's involvement in our school and the students. For them to see him on campus, to hear him. As you can see, we filled the bleachers. We couldn't fit all of the kids in the gym. 2,400 kids couldn't fit in our gym, but we streamed the event into their classrooms, and every teacher pulled up on on their TV, on their Promethean board, the stream, so everybody got to feel like they participated in the event. We then announced a Hall of Fame, and this is something that's now been sustainable. The Paul family continues to be engaged. As I transitioned this summer out from my principalship at the school and the new principal came in, I coordinated and facilitated a meeting with the Paul family and the new principal. Here's your stakeholders. How are you gonna engage them? And it obviously not everybody's got an NBA superstar that is an alumni of their school, but you've got ways in your space, in your community, in your buildings to be able to find ways to identify those folks that can make an impact for your students. I threw this slide in here last night, but it was a late edition, but if you haven't heard this song, Find Your People by Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, I would encourage you. I'm going to give you just a second. Take a screenshot, write it down, jot it down, but I'm not going to play the song for you, but it is a fantastic song about finding your people, all right? Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, Find Your People. We're moving into the agenda, strategies to assess your culture. And then we're going to wrap up with the keys to a positive school culture and how you make it happen. But here's how we assess. I think first and foremost, you assess and you begin with the people, the adults on your campus. Okay? You engage with your people through informal conversations, PLCs, maybe it's your school improvement team, maybe you put together focus groups. Obviously, we can do surveys and whatnot with our staff, but you want to have an open dialogue with your people and establish that trust, where they feel that they can come to you as an administrator or as a leader on the campus and really be able to share with you some of their struggles, their challenges that they're having. Engage with them on that school culture piece. Students, and several of you mentioned how one of the hard challenges is engaging and getting student voice. Again, no matter what level you're at, establishing some student councils or student government, and then you and your leadership team find some time to co-collaborate with your student council, right? So that, in my high schools, I used to have a principal and president, student body president. We would have a one-on-one. And just once a month, we would try to find time to kind of catch up, gauge what they're doing in their journey as the student body president. Now, you might not be able to do that at an elementary level, but at the elementary level, you could include your entire student council and go and sit and have lunch, buy them a pizza, have lunch with them, and just talk to them, engage with them. Set up some student advisory councils, focus groups, excuse me. Sometimes your student government can sometimes become popularity contests, right? But if you were to set up focus groups, advisory groups that either by grade level, by content area, whatever you would like to do, but be able to include your staff in selecting those students and say, hey, we don't want just the gifted students. Give us a wide range of students, and then be able to sit down with them, talk to them, have some guiding questions ahead of time. And for those of you that have secondary students, I really believe 6 through 12 students, I'm a believer in emailing students. I would email students quite often, and they would have my email and I would respond to them so that they knew that if they had something going on, they could email me or they could email their assistant principal and make sure that there was two-way communication there. Providing those spaces to give the people in your building a chance to give you feedback. How's it going, right? I would routinely, when I had new teachers, and whether they were a beginning teacher or maybe they were just new to the school, I would sometimes in the cafeteria sit down, start asking kids their schedule. They would say, hey, I have Miss Smith for English. I was like, oh, Miss Smith, she's a new teacher. How's she doing? Because part of my job is to make sure you guys are getting the best teachers. And so how's Miss Smith doing? But again, just trying to have some really genuine conversations. And sometimes it can be very intentional with focus groups, advisory councils, and things of that nature. Sometimes it can just be impromptu, right? And you can glean a whole lot of information from that. Parents and families, engaging with your stakeholders, with your families. I think it's important to set up some very intentional ways to go about doing that, whether it's through your PTA or PTO organizations, sending out some online surveys. Be flexible with your times. I think it's important if you're going to schedule a town hall meeting, don't schedule it at 5 o'clock. Who are you going to get to come at 5 o'clock? Everybody's getting off work, right? So be flexible with your times. Have something maybe first thing in the morning for those parents that maybe are working second shift. They can come in the morning before school, maybe when they drop their kid off. They can also pop in and have a town hall meeting, but then you have another option for a parent meeting later in the evening at a 6 o'clock. And again, to think about putting more on your plate, it doesn't always have to be the principal that's leading these meetings. Empower your leadership team, empower your assistant principal to be part of those and to facilitate those. I know that principals can't be everywhere all the time, but you can distribute that leadership in a way to provide opportunity for your other leaders in the building to facilitate and engage with the community. Community partners, I've talked some about that already, but establishing a way to really collaborate on different projects. I've done things at the beginning of the year when you have teacher work days and whatnot, professional days at the beginning of the year. We would do a community day where we take our staff out into the community and we do service projects, right? Give staff the option of, here's 8 different things that you can choose from, staff. We're going to go do these 8 different things and put small groups together and go get involved in the community. They'll be more likely to bring it back to you. School board members, I think it's important. Like I said earlier, this was a late addition in my career, but I do think it's important for you to engage with your school board, invite them into your space, invite them to come do some walks with you, to come peep into some classrooms with you. You control your narrative of your school. And if you just keep people at an arm's length, particularly those school board members or those folks, and I don't want anybody in my campus or on my, then the narrative gets posted on Facebook and you don't get to control it. And so too often that happens, right? I know we've got folks that go directly from a parent, concern and complaint. Instead of talking to the principal, they go straight to a school board, right? And so engage with the school board so that you can connect them to your campus. And then alumni. We've talked about the Chris Paul story, but trying to establish either some mentorship programs, some annual events, something that will foster alumni participation back into your campus. And like I said, all levels have alumni. So elementary folks, I encourage you to think about ways to engage with your local, with your feeder high school, to maybe bring back some of those juniors and seniors to do reads, to read a book with the first graders, or to do some mentorship or some tutoring for your students. Engage the alumni. I'm going to throw up a lot of different bullets here, and Arlen will put some of these in the chat. So as we're doing this, I'm just kind of giving you some other ways that you can learn your culture. And here's some things that I've done in the past and some rubrics and things that I've used in the past. So Arlen, if you'll throw in that school culture rubric, that is something that I think allows you to kind of self-assess where you're at, looking at the look-fors on that rubric and be able to kind of gauge where you're at as a school. And so I appreciate you, Arlen, for throwing that in the chat. Several states, I don't know if Illinois is one of these states, but I know North Carolina every 2 years does a teacher working conditions survey, allows the staff to provide feedback that you as administration can lean into. We also do like a panorama survey with our parents and stakeholders. We send that out. That's through Panorama's, if you're familiar with that, it's a third party agency, but they do a great job in getting that word out. A school-wide core behavior assessment, if he'll throw that into the chat, that is a way for you to kind of look at, again, how are you establishing the culture within your building and on your campus. These are for you to use, make a copy. And then I want you to just take a reflection moment. I don't expect you to open up these links right away. Maybe you are, and that's fine if you want to investigate a little. We've got about 5 minutes left, but take a minute and consider how you would respond to the feedback from stakeholders. So what are some unique ways that you've collected feedback from stakeholders? Because I clearly don't have all the, it's not a magic formula. I don't have all the answers. So can we learn from one another? Are there some other unique ways that you and your campus has collected feedback from some of these stakeholders? And do you mind sharing some of those in the chat? I'll give you just a minute. I know we've covered a lot of them on how you can engage your stakeholders. Maybe there's not many other unique ways out there, but if you have any unique ways that we haven't mentioned here today, or maybe something that's really worked for you, feel free to add that into the chat. Oh yeah, multicultural night. Great idea, Keith. Great idea, and that hits on that inclusivity part of your school culture. That is a great idea. Great way to bring families into it as well. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I like food. People will show up if there's food. Having those performances is another great idea to get families and parents there, right? When their child is going to sing, is going to perform in some type of capacity, then they're going to show up. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, as I mentioned, we've got a few minutes left as we wrap up. I do want to go over kind of 10 steps for positive change. So what I call the 10-4, right? It's a 10-4, 10 steps for positive change. We're not going to dive deeply into these steps, but I do want to just share them with you. Not going to read them all out to you. I'll hit some highlights, and number 3 is a highlight for me. So as you set those goals for what you want your school to become and evolve to, make sure those goals are measurable, okay? And then report back out those measures, right? Your staff wants that transparency, and so make sure your goals are measurable and report them back out. Oh, Michelle, I like coffee with teachers, celebrate academic success. I really like that. Yeah. Including your local newspaper, social media is a great outlet. Absolutely. So as we look at those steps for positive change, I wanted to highlight number 3. I also wanted to highlight number 7, which kind of goes along with that transparency. So you've gotten the action steps and you're starting to implement the plan on how you're going to go about it. Make sure you're progress monitoring, right? So as your leadership team is seeing some things, you have to inspect what you expect, right? And so make sure you're progress monitoring those steps. If you're going to implement an SEL initiative in your school, then make sure you're monitoring whether or not it's being done with fidelity, right? And then make adjustments. As we said earlier, it's about evolving, and that can even happen within a school year, right? I met with a principal today that started a freshman academy. First year at their high school, they're kind of secluding their freshmen to kind of make sure they're meeting their freshmen' needs, and they're not getting out into picking up bad habits from some of those upperclassmen. So they started this freshman academy. And in that, where they're seeing a lot of their struggle, or some kids that are trying to, to skip class, or to escape the freshman academy wing, is when they transition to lunch, and they're having some issues in lunch. And so I asked her, I said, what are some ways that you're thinking about, making some changes or addressing this? And where we arrived is we're going to switch the lunch period. So instead of the freshmen having first lunch at the beginning of the lunch period, for the second semester, they're just going to flip it to the end of the lunch period. And so all of the upperclassmen are going to go ahead and have lunch and get out of the lunchroom, and the freshmen are going to come in at the end. It's an evolution, right? So you adjust the plan to create the culture that you want. And don't forget to celebrate successes. It's so important, you guys, to celebrate the success that you're having, and find those moments, whether it's reaching into your social media outlets and posting those celebrations, whether it's over morning announcements, whether it's at a staff meeting, highlighting a staff member that's doing great things. One strategy that I used was, I called it Village Victories. Our campus we referred to as the Village, and each Monday I would send out a Google form to both students and staff, and it would be just a shout out form. Why do you want to shout this person out? A teacher could shout out a student could shout out another student or a teacher, it didn't matter. And then every Friday, they would get in their inbox the shout outs of the week. And so it was a way to recognize individuals for positive things that were happening on our campus. Take time to evaluate and reflect. That's some of what you're doing here. Hopefully you're going to have some time to kind of dive into those documents, to look at those documents, see if that can fit on your campus, see if that's something that you and your leadership team can use to kind of self-reflect and assess where you're at. And then maybe that helps you create an implementation plan, right? Again, here's the 10 keys for success. And here's 5 keys to make it successful. Collaborate, communicate, be flexible, celebrate, and that last one is trust. And you establish trust by being transparent, by listening, following up and following through, clear communication, and being fair and equitable. Guys, I've enjoyed the opportunity. I see this in the chat, unable to open it. I will make sure I'll go back and check those Google Drive share settings and make sure I've got those shared the right way so that you can access those documents. Establish that trust with your people. You're in the people business. Be someone for somebody, because one key to school culture, one person and one day at a time, can change a school, you guys. I've seen it happen, and I'm seeing it happen in the work that I'm doing with other administrators and other schools that I'm visiting now, and it can happen in your school. Thank you so much. Enjoy the journey. If you'd like to connect with me, I've got my socials. We'll share the presentation out. Arlen, I went a few minutes over. I apologize. Thank you so much, guys.
Not a problem, Kevin. We really appreciate these strategies for successful school culture, and loved hearing your stories as well from your time as a principal. That was really great to highlight those. So good presentation. We've got just a couple minutes left. If you have a question for Kevin, type it into the chat. Kevin, you're getting lots of thank yous, so that looks like you were able to reach a lot of people today, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we want. If you have any questions or comments for Kevin, feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll monitor those for the next couple of minutes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.